Today is February 27th, 2022. Welcome to Native Calgarian. Oki, Nagana Go, Mekoche, Stakom Aki. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use she and her pronouns. Native Calgarian is being recorded on the lands of the Niitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfoot south of the imposed US-Canadian border are the Blackfeet. North of the border are the Siksika, Gunai, and Bagani of the Confederacy. These lands are Treaty 7, signed September 22nd, 1877, with signatures that include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Wesley, Chiniki, and Bearspaw nations of the Stoney Nations, and the Dene from Tsuut'ina. I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit status, and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. All non-Indigenous are treaty partners with the government signing on your behalf. I honor the Blackfoot, and the members have been so kind to me on my Red Road journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name. I was born in Calgary, or in Blackfoot Mohkinstsis is Michelle Elliott, an English name which has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. My mother is Northern Slavey Dene, or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. My father is so Canadian. I'm a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution, while having an Indian Act imposed status card. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Hair people, like a rabbit, for folks who may get that mixed up with hair from the top of your head. So I'm from the Hair people, also called the Great Bear Lake people in Treaty 11. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene Nation is a visitor to this area of Clincho Tine Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning Many Horse Town, named after the Calgary Stampede. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as a guest and honoring your and acknowledging your role as a treaty partner, which is pretty critical for understanding, considering what's happening with Ukraine and Russia, understanding the land and the history of it. My humblest apologies to the Blackfoot elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. Any mistakes or misinterpretations will be on me. I encourage questions so that misunderstandings can be cleared up as soon as possible. I do not speak on behalf of all the Indigenous. I just share what I know as I walk down my red road. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you to previous donors for showing your support. I wish you knew how you saved our butt. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or your questions. Also, giving a review helps, whichever medium you're listening from. I have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. Also, I do teachings. So if you are somebody interested in picking my brain, it's a great place to go to check it out. So last time I said, oh, this podcast is going to be historic because of the Emergencies Act that was invoked. Well, this one is too. Last week we discussed the honking convoys that made its way to Ottawa for 3 weeks. The feds, province, and cities all played politics instead of actually doing something. So the borders in the three parts of Coutts, Alberta, Manitoba, and Windsor, Ontario were locked up, and the Emergency Act from 1988 was invoked. All of that seemed to be pretty wrapped up this week. Unfortunately for us, that's not the case. The Westerners who ignore what's happening out in the West, obviously, they don't realize that these yahoos will just continue doing these stupid shenanigans here. Yesterday, there was a group of Calgarians that chose to try to do a counter protest. Like, you have to understand, we had these stupid yellow vesters that morphed into this, anti-vax convoy folks. But I mean, ultimately, they're all rooted in conspiracy and hate. And anyway, that continues here every freaking weekend, and it's annoying as hell. And our area just south of the downtown on the west side is called Beltline, and it actually has a lot of historical reverence for the LGBTQ2+ community. It was called the Fruit Loop. Another show, another day. But that bigger picture, that area has a ton of people that live in apartment buildings and such. And this is the area that these yellow vesters and honking convoy morons have decided they're going to march for their freedoms, and they've been doing it every Saturday. So anyway, there was a group of counter protesters for one of the first times, and a smoke bomb went off, of course, and to the surprise of absolutely nobody, the police did nothing. So, it's been so obvious the last 3 weeks. I'm sure you understood from the show how that's all rooted in white supremacy and racism. And, here, lucky you folks out in Ottawa don't get to hear it now, but we get to hear these yahoos is the best way to say it. So moving on, the hypocrisy of conservatives and Jason Kenney. All of these half craptastic health mandates are going to be lifted on Tuesday here. Anyone with knowledge of data knows that these half-ass measures that are going to be lifted, they're just political ploys. We're going to see a huge rate in COVID-19, and deaths continue now because of this political decision made by basically ignorant yahoos who actually believe we have mandates. Nobody is going to somebody's house and forcing a vaccine in their arm. That has never happened. So it's just the worst to hear, this misinformation and being said on behalf of Albertans. But our premier, proud to, placate to white supremacy and any conspiracy that could possibly hate Justin Trudeau, which I have no respect for in any way. Anyway, so you're going to be happy to learn that if you are in Alberta, there will be a reduction in your chewing tobacco taxes. So all the yahoos of Alberta who use their chewing tobacco are going to pay less taxes, which is really ironic, because if there was anyone who claims personal responsibility and freedoms and, taxpayers shouldn't have to pay for that, well, isn't this the one thing you all would agree on you're supposed to be paying freaking taxes on, so that the rest of us don't pay the taxes for your disgusting, dirty habit? Just wondering. And, normally, as a person who cares about harm reduction, I would like to not use that type of language when talking about an addiction, but only because this was literally created for the small privileged segment of white yahoos that love Jason Kenney, and he's placating to them. Do I have a problem with it? Because this is disgusting. Where on planet Earth are you going to find data that says, yeah, we can reduce taxes on chewing tobacco? Because that is clearly not a problem, especially in a global pandemic, which we're just going to ignore because we are so entitled and privileged we can. Ugh. So anyway, at least the UCP base will be happy that their taxes for chewing tobacco are going down. So they put out their budget, and of course it's fantastic because fossil fuel capitalists have been making money hand over fist at the expense of, and obviously the sovereignty of Indigenous people, but the profits over people, lack of taxes that they pay for municipal and all the rest of it. They're such greedy capitalist pigs. I just cannot wrap my brain around how everybody placates to them. Literally, we are going to be paying more. Well, right now in Alberta, Albertans are paying so much for their energy, so their natural gas, power, everything. It's just astronomical. This is literally going to put people on the streets because Rachel Notley had a cap on our energy, and Kenny, the first thing he did was take it off. And because the prices are so ridiculous right now, because capitalist pigs have to make so much profit, we're all paying the price in our energy costs and bills out here. So that's legitimately a thing. So anyway, whatever. Richard Feehan is the NDP critic for the Indigenous Affairs. And he tweeted out, there was absolutely nothing for First Nation, Métis, and Inuit, as well as Métis settlements. So, here we are again, no reconciliation, no concept of investment into economics. I mean, it's interesting because a lot of folks as I was learning, they still think they're progressive, but consider Indian Act chiefs and hereditary chiefs not agreeing somehow. Oh, well, I don't know who to believe. That is racism. That is your anti-Indigenous racism speaking loud and clear for us all to hear, that you cannot put together this concept. So let me put it together, because clearly you understand Ukraine and Russia very well. So imagine Indigenous people are Ukrainians and we sovereignly live on this place, and Russia, you, Canada, have come in and decided, oh no, we're just taking over. Oh, cool. So this is happening. Russia decides, oh, we're going to just impose something called the Indian Act, and we expect you to follow it, otherwise you go to jail. But your actual governance, the Ukrainian governance that you once had, or AKA traditional governance, yeah, we're not going to listen to that. And then when the BBC reports it and they say, well, I don't know, the leaders that were elected under the Indian Act through Russia don't agree with the traditional governance of Ukrainians. Well, I guess we can't possibly comprehend this, because even though we're Harvard educated, we just can't put our brains around this. That's what you sound like to me. As Canadians, that's what you sound like to me. You sound like absolute ignorant buffoons, and especially when you claim that you're progressive and that you're helping First Nations. So let's break that down a little more. Traditional governance is allowing us to be ourselves. I don't know why this is such a difficult conversation, such a difficult concept for folks. We had governance before you invaded, imposed genocide through disease, governance, land theft, genocide through the health, genocide through Indian residential school, the brutal campaign with your Northwest Mounted Police, RCMP, and now City Police that kill our people every single day, and now the toxic, drug crisis that you guys seem to be a-okay with killing Indigenous survivors of residential school with. So, I can't put it together quicker, or not quicker, in a better way. And just quit calling yourself progressive. Quit saying you care about First Nations. Just quit, because you don't. If you can't wrap your head around these simple concepts, you literally have zero business trying to help us. Zero, because your anti-Indigenous bias is way too strong to be helping us. So, just look at the people who are helping us. Bear Clan, Awuton Healing Lodge here. Up north, they have tons of Poundmaker Lodge, all sorts of organizations that are actually helping Indigenous people, because ding, 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 they're Indigenous people. So quit pretending that you care. There's I don't know, about 3 white males, mostly from Edmonton, that are legitimately just profiting off of their activism. And I'm like, thanks a lot, dudes. I'm barely making ends meet. I can't survive. I have information to give people. They are not paying me to teach them nothing. So whatever. And I don't know how to even put this together anymore. It is very clear, not just from the convoy, not just from everything else, but even right now with the Ukrainian-Russian issue. The pearl clutching coming from Canada. Oh my God, white people are going to be hurt. Oh no, your racism is so painfully clear, because lots of folks all across the globe right now by Canada are being bombed, being hurt, refugees, displaced, but they're not white. So suddenly they don't care. That's the problem. I just can't even wrap my brain around how daft Canadians are, that they can only see color. And I'm going to call out Anonymous. They claim they're trying to help the Ukrainians. They claim. I don't know. I think they're just full of shit, personally. But here's an example where they had ample time to help with Black Lives Matter, actual human rights abuses when it comes to police brutality, etc., and they chose not to. But now that it's white people, the Ukrainians, they're all about this. And I hate to say it, both on the Russian side and the Ukrainians, there are deep white supremacy ties in both. both thinking they are the best race, which is insane. And I know Canadians will be all upset that we are pearl clutching. I can't believe she said that. But there are people like that in our Canadian military, our police, and somehow they're blind to that too. So, that's just the reality of watching this play out. Now, I want to make it very clear, like obviously I support Ukraine just as I support in like any indigenous land defender anywhere. And I can't believe you have to say that, but there's no reason why you can't, support obviously the Ukrainians, but while calling out the racism that's so painfully clear, like Black people, brown people being turned away, but they are Ukrainian, but they're not the right kind of Ukrainian for some people's heads. So it's like, unless you're white, then you get a free pass. That's not okay. So I don't know. I really wish Canadians would unpack their sentiments about all of this, but I know they won't. I know this is a pointless conversation. So anyway, I finally blocked Paul Brandt this week on Twitter. I was really sad about it because, and I had this conversation with somebody who was excited that Wayne Gretzky called out the Canada hockey from saying, okay, look, we can't have Russians play in the, juniors coming up or whatever else they've rescheduled. And, you have to mourn these people. When Wayne Gretzky stood on the side of Harper after all of the anti-Indigenous policies he's put through, we as a family had to mourn the great one. When he retired in '99, we got rid of his hat. We got rid of everything. And like the male toxicity of hockey was bad enough, and politics in hockey was bad enough. But then to see, Wayne Gretzky like publicly support Stephen Harper, we couldn't do it. We couldn't even have things that reminded us of the 80s, like that legacy that it doesn't matter. And it's the same thing with Darren Fleury. Be a Flames fan all I want, but at the end of the day, I can't be anymore because he's gone down a path that I cannot follow, to, I guess, quote, Queen Amidala. Sorry, everything Star Wars for me. So anyway, Paul Brandt, supposed to care about human trafficking, and he does in Cambodia, but when it comes to here, like he started this organization called Not in My City, but I tried to work with him. I had hope that we could get him to have an anti racism lens, but he is not there. And then after the shit he pulled with Convoy and supporting with helicopters and supplies, I will never respect that man. And it sucks because it's like, I have so very few heroes to look at and they're not worth it. Maybe Katie Lang is, that's about it. So I'm just sad it was another person you had to let go. I wanted to give an update on last week's tie-in about all of this. So at the time of recording, we knew that a Black man was killed in Forest Lawn here by the Calgary Police, and we have since learned his name, Latjor Tuel, and he was 41. He was a child soldier from the South Sudan. It was almost at the exact time I was recording, the South Sudanese community was out where he was killed and mourning, understandably. Since then, his daughters have come out on like social media, and there was a GoFundMe. I'm gonna put the link in my information. You have to understand while the goal has been surpassed, we're talking about a needed cost forever, not just the funeral costs and travel right now, the costs to grieve, but there's going to be court costs now. And because his father is gone, that income will always be gone. So if you can donate it, if you could share, these needs will be forever. And I think there needs to be an understanding. 15 years ago, there was a lot of killings of South Sudanese by the Calgary Police. And I'll never forget this cop looking me at the eye and saying, "Oh, but you have to understand, Michelle, these were child soldiers, so they're not afraid of guns." And I'm like that has always resonated with me as if, that's their weapon. So the police see when they show their guns as something that people should just automatically, be afraid of, and do what you have to say. I just will never, like, that was kind of the start of why I understood we needed de-escalation and we needed to defund the police because they were getting tanks. Now we just found out that they have a plane that they have to upgrade. So ridiculous. I can't even believe it. So our Calgary Police Chief Mark Neufeld was quoted. Certainly, I think we are well positioned with our diversity advisory boards and the work we do with community, he told the commission after he was getting grilled at a commission meeting. In our anti-racism committee, I think we have the mechanisms there to be able to get that cultural sensitivity and incorporate those pieces into our training. But again, these situations I would suggest are far from perfect. They are very dynamic when they occur, blah, blah, blah. So I can't stress enough that you can have diversity advisory boards. I'm in them, but we advocate for systemic changes that aren't implemented. Like that's the whole thing. Like I remember when Chafin was in, like we weren't even, like all of our recommendations were ignored then too. So like it's just it's insane to me that you would use these diversity advisory boards as like oh no, see, we're doing something, when it's like, no, well, we literally tell you, you know, in my case, implement the 231 calls to justice, implement the 94 calls to action, and they don't. And like, you know, call to action 57 is anti-racism training and Indigenous education. So obviously that's not implemented if we're still shooting and killing child soldiers. Like I just want everyone to stop and imagine. So I'm 45. Latjor, he was 41. So we're like the same demographic and age. And same demographic. Boy, did I say that wrong. So we're the same age group. Sorry. So he survives a war. He was a child soldier. He was forced to leave his family, a gun thrown in his hand, and he was forced to participate in unethical, unmoral the things as a child. Somehow gets to Canada and gets shot and killed by our Calgary Police. I don't know how people sleep at night. You know, Friday there was a large vigil and I guess it was a protest in front of City Hall. And, you know, trust is broken was the message that came from the South Sudanese community to the police. You know, again, pointing out obvious oppression dynamics of the city and the Calgary Police expect all of this for free, the community to give them. They gave them solutions 15 years ago. Now they are expecting this marginalized group, while grieving, while traumatized, while hurt, without cultural supports, to just give them more free information and free help. Like, I can't understand how people don't see the oppression dynamics. White, cis, straight, privileged, city of Calgary, city police folks getting paid to sit on their high horses, child soldier, refugees trying to live with trauma, all sorts of mental health issues, trying to just survive in a new Canadian culture, which in itself is rooted in white supremacy, therefore hard to transition into, mourning the loss of their brothers and sisters from back there, now here, and for free. We're supposed to just but they did give them free information 15 years ago that they chose not to implement. Shocking. So needless to say, I'm really pissed off. I feel like it is absolutely unfair power dynamics that the city and the police are expecting of this community. Again, you know, the UCP budget came out. There sure as fuck isn't any mental health supports, and especially culturally sensitive ones. Like, you know, last episode I talked about Delia Caffey, the Black woman that was brutally attacked by Calgary police officer Alex Dunn. Would she still be around if the work that the South Sudanese community did 15 years ago, you know, the TRC has been out since 2015, you know, these solutions were given to them, the Indigenous community gave them to them, and yet would she be here had they done any of that work? You know, regular Canadians, tell your leaders to act or you're complicit. Like, this is crazy because in the Ukraine, if you stand to be neutral, then obviously you're on the side of the oppressors, you're on the side of the Russians. And Canadians can understand that concept like that. But when it comes to Black people, when it comes to Indigenous people, they just can't seem to wrap their head around it. Bullshit. You're just racist and you need to get over it. This is bullshit. This is bullshit. There is no way this man should be dead. None. They were talking about this over 15 years ago. I'm so tired of this. I'm so tired of people just being okay with Black and Indigenous bodies dying. I'm so tired of it. You wonder why we can't trust you guys. Right, because your white savior activists are helping us, but not talking about this shit. So anyway, you know, and this conversation about culturally sensitive trauma services and mental health supports, like training for public servants, none of this is even including the deaths by toxic drug crisis. So Wednesday we had our event, it went forward. It was a little chilly. We had amazing speakers to keep us warm. They told us heartbreaking, heart-wrenching personal stories about not knowing about the resources that were available till it was too late. I don't know if folks not outside of Alberta understand this, but like when we talk about Alberta being conservative, it's ridiculous. The existing services for all addiction here are all Christian-based abstinence approaches, all of them, which we all know lead to death, not recovery. There's like no data to support this, you know, Christian evangelical way of dealing with this. So, you know, unfortunately, after people die, they find out, oh, did you hear about harm reduction? Have you heard about this? You know, destigmatizing the concepts. Like, I mean, I still have friends, even though we've legalized cannabis, who are still like, you know, see that as the devil's lettuce. Like, that's real out here. So of course we don't have proper services. We certainly don't have the right services for a child soldier from the South Sudan. We don't have like anti-racism mental health supports. We don't have, you know, Indian residential school houseless supports that should be there. Nothing culturally sensitive, because if you're not white, if you're not Christian, you can't be. Ironically, a lot of the Black community is quite Christian, because anybody who's ever listened to me knows that all of the immigration organizations are all Christian based. So they bring in a minimum 50% Christians, if not more, into Canada so that they can continue with the Christian colonization of Canada. So a lot of our people who are Black, brown, they're Christians and proud to be Christians. But yet, amazingly, we don't have proper culturally sensitive mental health services, or, you know, more recovery models as opposed to abstinence models when it comes to addiction. So I don't know how our elected officials sleep at night, but they seem to do just fine. The fellow who asked me to come and speak, his name was Dr. Ewan Thompson, and he tweeted out that it's a war zone. These deaths are violent, political, and profitable. And his message, tell your leaders to end the drug war. So I'm telling you, go write your MLAs, city councilors, MPs, specifically health ministers and their critics. Also, if you're in Alberta, you're fighting the conservative machine. So you have to get involved to make sure we get non-conservatives elected. I can't emphasize how different our worlds are experiencing this pandemic. You know, so I had the 2 GoFundMes last week, one for a anonymous non-white female friend who's has severe mental health struggles right now, and one for our Two-Spirit houseless friend and her dog. Good news, she finally got a house. She finally got housed. It was like 3 months with her family, our family, and agencies to try to get there. It's been a nightmare for this person, and they've gone through so many other personal things. It's not really my story to tell, but I can tell you this much. And it's that as Indigenous people, we are experiencing this pandemic so differently than white Canadians, or, privileged colonized POC. So NDP news from the view of this cynical Dene liberal. I don't have a membership to the NDP because it would be unconstitutional from both the Liberal and NDP rule book. But for average Joe Canadian, they don't even know the different orders of government, let alone their rules for membership, which is a shame as this political system was imposed on my peoples. Anyway, I'm obviously behind Marilyn North Pagan 100%, and she's running in Calgary Klein. So, if you believe my words, endorse her, fundraise, donate for her, volunteer for her by getting all of your friends in that constituency to take out memberships and vote for her. The important dates to remember is March 3rd is the candidates forum. March 12th is the NDP membership deadline. And March 26th is the actual nomination vote. So if you don't have your membership before March 12th, you can't vote in the March 26th deadline. So obviously I have folks that I have to follow now, and so I've been trying to pay attention to the NDP candidates in Calgary East, and a friend of mine I was hoping was going to run has chosen not to, which is, it is what it is. It's not easy running, and Canadians don't give a shit about elections, which sucks because it explains the situation we're in, where ignorant red or yahoos get to go to friggin' Ottawa in trucks, and blue premiers take down any half-assed measures we had for this pandemic. So what do I fucking know? Anyway, one of the NDP candidates that is on my radar is a Filipino Canadian public teacher named Rosman Valencia, and his pronouns are in his title, so he uses he and him. I've never seen the NDP actually support people of color. I know they have a committee, but I've never seen them, be active and do things. So anyway, he's actually been actively talking about these police killings of Latjor Tuel, and that's really refreshing. I'm sure the white supremacists in the NDP apparatus are totally fucking losing it, so that makes me laugh. Again, like I watched Rachel Notley scream at Pride, build that pipe, right after the land acknowledgement. So it's literally like cheering on Russia to invade Ukraine for all of those too daft to possibly comprehend Indigenous issues, but seem to really understand the Ukrainian issue. So for the record, as the Alberta Liberals I ran for, we did campaign on investing in mental health, healthcare, police accountability long before it was cool. So it's really disappointing to see the NDP now letting at least one candidate get away with talking about these things, but more so the Alberta society being like, oh my God, this is an issue. Maybe we should vote for it, whatever. So if you care about fighting the stupid racist colonial political structure, learn your constituency, learn your candidates, the nomination votes, and get out to vote. More into the wheelhouse of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, like don't mix words with that. Like they are literally a sovereign country getting invaded. I feel like I should tell you all of my history, but I don't know if that's necessary. I don't know. Anyway, so when I opened up my social media, obviously I was absolutely shocked how many Canadians looked at Russia negatively, considering they don't see how relatable that is here. I support Ukraine 100%. I support all land defenders, obviously, but I am going to call out the racism in this ridiculousness while we can before the nukes fly. So folks that I really want to encourage you following on Twitter. So I guess here's the other thing on social media. I normally try to, retweet things I see on Twitter, copy them onto Facebook and Instagram. So, and even my TikTok, sometimes I try to remember that too. But when it comes to this, I'm really focused on what's happening. Obviously, I'm not an expert on Ukrainian-Russian relations. I will tell you a little bit of my personal background on that, but for me, I'm looking to the absolute experts, and I'm following what Ukraine is putting out. Um, so my activism is based off of, letting the people speak for themselves. So that's why, like, I would share the South Sudanese quotes on my Twitter when talking about this issue with Mr. Tuel, but I, never speak for them. Well, the same thing with Ukraine. Ukraine will speak for themselves just fine. So I'm following their president Zelensky, and I'm following their defense ministry. They have the vice president is also the ministry for digital communication. So these things are of interest to me because this is how they're going to communicate to us. Um, and right now, it's really hard to always discern propaganda to truth. So that's why obviously I'm just going to follow the Ukraine Twitter feeds and see what they have to say is the number one. But there is a person that I wanted to bring attention to, and her name is Dr. Kimberly St. Julien Varnon. So on Twitter, she is SKVARNON. So SK Varnon, and she's a PhD from Penn University History Department. She's a race and blackness relations expert in the USSR, and she's a writer for the Ukraine Review editor, and she's part of this Swarthmore and Harvard alumni. She speaks Russian, Ukrainian, and German. So this is a person I'm following because she's very clear about anti-blackness in this conversation. She's the one that's been tweeting out about refugees being turned away that are not white, basically. So she's somebody that I'm following, and a lot of the activists that I've been following on Twitter are rightfully calling out the obvious racism that we're seeing with white refugees being let in, but not Black ones or people of color. Roma are another race of people that are being discriminated against and have been forever. So it's not okay, but those are the Indigenous people there. And as we all know, colonial powers hate Indigenous people. So that's where we're at. So I'm following that. Obviously, this Zelensky has become a total super bomb. Everybody seems to be really loving him. And well, and to be fair, so New York Times, as I said in the last episode, they totally screwed the pooch when it came to Canada and the convoy. And so I'm having a really hard time with retweeting or liking anything that they have to say. A lot of folks I know like quit their subscriptions. Well, it turns out they did a stupid hit piece on this guy and said, well, he's not up to the task for leadership because, he was legitimately a comedian. So he's 44, I'm 45. So anyway, we would have grown up when the USSR broke apart. I was in grade 8, so he would have been grade 7 or something when the USSR broke apart. And he's the grandson of Jewish, like, how does this go? So there was 4 brothers, 3 of them were killed at the Holocaust, and the one that didn't, that's his great grandfather. So like this is legitimately this grandson of Holocaust survivors, and now he won a presidency with an incredibly majority vote, and because his past life was he was a comic, like he was a comedian telling jokes. Apparently he played the piano with his privates for 5 minutes. Conspiracy theorists are just taking this and going crazy with it. They're doing the whole, Trump supports Putin, and this is their conspiracy theory, which I do not agree with in any capacity, but they actually think that somehow this war is stopping human trafficking. You have to be really down that hole in order to possibly understand this. And I don't recommend in any I don't want anybody to look into that further. But unfortunately, being in Alberta, these are my neighbors and even some of my family members who believe in these outlandish conspiracies and, and rooted in white supremacy, all of them. Anyway, Ukrainians are a big part of my life. Every world war had massive settlements of Ukrainians into Western Canada at the time that Canada was nation building. So under the War Measures Act in the Great War, thousands of Ukrainians were interned actually at government camps. In the 1920s, they opened up immigration. The Second World War brought in tons of Ukrainians. So on my dad's side, he was from Yorkton, Saskatchewan, and my grandparents lived there and had a little cabin at Good Spirit Lake in Kenora. So so many people were Ukrainian, and although I'm not proud to say this, a lot of folks were referred to as Ukes. But that racism, that white supremacy, this is what the racist conservatives took down former Premier Ed Stelmach with, because he was Ukrainian. So in other words, he just wasn't the right type of white. So they took him down. And this is the type of racism I talk about here in Alberta that folks not from here can possibly comprehend. It's awful. It's mean. Anyway, I grew up with lots of people of Ukrainian descent. I've enjoyed every type of pierogi and sausage. I remember in Fort McMurray, my grade 2 teacher, Mrs. Powell, had taught us how to take a pin on the egg and empty it and make scrambled eggs, and then start the dyeing and such in order to make these beautiful. Anybody who's ever seen the designs of Ukrainian eggs, it's just the most beautiful thing. Anyway, we have Vegreville, Alberta has this the biggest Ukrainian egg ever. I think it's the largest one in the world because we have a huge population of Ukrainians in Western Canada. I also seen a lot of folks around me talk about who are I didn't walk the red road until my 30s, and when I did, I was still learning, and I had a friend tell us, because my daughter wears scarves on her head all the time. This friend told me that when our headdresses and our eagle feathers were really outlawed, that actually that's why we started wearing cookum scarves, was to hide our our stuff. And I don't know much about that teaching, but I've always appreciated that teaching, and I'm always looking for more on that. And anyway, that's part of the reason why I have a red scarf behind me, one of the cookum scarves, because I wear them. I wear orange ones when more focused on Indian residential schools. I wear the red ones when more focused on missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit. My daughter loves the blue ones. I should just make outfits that match, but I'm getting off track here. Anyway, Treaty 6, Chief Morin put out a beautiful statement about support with Ukrainians, because Ukrainians have been such a huge part of the fabric of Indigenous and Western Canada since contact of colonial Canada. And I harbor no bad feelings for Ukrainian, although there are ties to white supremacy apparently in their army, but there is in ours too. So anyway, getting off track. So obviously, I haven't seen anybody speak out that they're on Russian side, other than some folks that are really down the rabbit hole of conspiracy. So these would be anti-vesters or anti-mandate folks, yellow vesters. These are folks that are really down the conspiracy world that are plenty here in Alberta. And I'm sure we'll see Paul Brandt and all sorts of folks tweeting out about it. It's ridiculous. But I have been seeing Anonymous claiming that they're trying to take down systems in Russia and such, but I don't know if I believe it in any capacity, because they just seem like a bunch of kids trying to pretend to do good when they've had the opportunity to do good in so many ways and have chosen not to. So I just don't know what to expect there. But what I do know is that meddling with somebody with nuclear capabilities is not a smart move in any capacity. So I just would never promote that. Our Deputy Prime Minister, Christiana Freeland, she's from Alberta, and she's of the elite that were able to go to Harvard. Anyway, she has a really interesting story to tell about what it was like in when she was 20, and she went to Harvard and she went to Ukraine, and the KGB were like trying to intimidate her and all sorts of stuff. So it's hard because right now you're in the middle of war propaganda now, so you're going to hear like that dichotomy of only good and only bad, and that's a hard conversation because why is Putin, choosing to go after Ukraine? And everyone's going to say because he's madman, which is true. But there is history there with NATO, and there's a history there with trying to deal with a Russian superpower. Now that it's been 30 years of so-called, change from the USSR, um, and the Ukrainians, they've had 30 years of not being under Russian rule, but as a sovereign nation, as Ukraine. That's terminology I'm trying to lose. The Ukraine to Ukraine, trying to lose that. Anyway, my heart is with them. Anyone who's been kind of paying attention to the live feeds, watching kids being displaced, they're having to be refugees and forced to flee with their moms, while the dads are conscripted. Now, some are willing, don't get me wrong, but they just conscripted, I think it was 16 to 65, giving them all a gun and telling them it's martial law now. And, the civilians being slightly trained with the Ukraine military, which is vast, by the way, like it has tanks, everything. But just, the Russians have nukes, and I can't emphasize that enough. For folks who don't know, I found this out, I don't know, 5 years ago, maybe a while ago. Anyway, Satu Deni were at the Ukrainian city area. There was that material being taken out. They were unaware of the Manhattan Project and what nuclear capabilities were. And when the deaths of all of those Vietnamese happened with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that was something that the Dene elders went to Japan and apologized. And so I've taken that teaching very much to heart, and I think it's inappropriate for us to use nuclear power or nuclear weapons, because we can't keep treaty with each other. We can't keep treaty with the animals. We can't keep treaty with nature. And when I say we, I mean more so the colonial Canadians, just no concept of any of this. They are way in Yahoo economics, caring about their bottom line, care about, natural law, people, all of that. So I'm obviously against nuclear war. I asked folks a few episodes to start following some of the nuclear weapon disarmament sites that I work with, and I'm seeing their pop-ups coming up, and right now, right this exact moment, I believe, Belarus paratroopers are going into Ukraine, and there was already a kindergarten that was hit, a Ukrainian kindergarten that was hit, and civilians are dead, and I don't know, my heart is with them right now. And I know that Christiana Freeland was meant for this moment to be in this position. I know the KGB hate her, or I don't know if they're the KGB anymore, but anyway. So I'm just going to try to promote what I think people want to know. So for example, there's an English bank page from the Ukraine, shared that for Ukrainians, because we have tons here that want to willingly be a part of the foreign military. I retweeted that. And I'm not a supporter of war and the military, but I just know this is what people are interested in doing, and I'm worried. I have a friend from Red Deer. She's deployed. She's a commander of a ship that was supposed to go to the Arctic, and I don't know if she did. I don't know if they're going to change directions now. And I have a friend serving in the Esquimalt, and I'm worried when he's going to get deployed. So, and then our friends and neighbors, of course, will join this war. And you're not going to believe this, but Fox News is had this person spouting off that Canada needs liberation. So I don't know if you're going to have like some yahoos from the States start some sort of civil war, believing Hillary's emails and Pizzagate are a real thing, and that I don't know what, I don't even know, understand that conspiracy theory stuff. Even though I used to be a part of the 9/11 truth movement, like once upon a time, they were the only places that were like, legitimately talking about building 3 or Indian residential schools. So, and then that shift happened where everything went haywire. So anyway, I'm getting way off topic, and I appreciate you all listening to my ramblings. Sometimes I don't know why anybody listens to me, but I appreciate it. I appreciate all the support that you've given me up to this moment. I've been getting really good feedback on the last episode specifically. So if you hear something that you would like me to add, I would love to add it here. I don't know. Really appreciate that. Just want to give a shout out to that last comic standing on Prime. It's so ridiculous watching Tom Grease and talk about delicious cheese sandwiches. And May did get kicked out, and she was the one supporting Indian residential school survivors. So that was sad, but love her to pieces. And if you watched Kim Convenience, this last episode, oh my God, I don't want to give it away, but you have to watch it. My God. Anyway, I'm proud that this podcast has given solutions, cultural training, first aid for all of them to create a safer space for Indigenous people of color, those with disabilities, and LGBTQ2+ to speak. Thank you to authors Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, Alicia Fridkin for creating What is Indigenous Cultural Safety and Why Should I Care About It, that you can find at heretohelp.bc.ca. Their work are cultural action tools. Said it so many times in my podcast. Please support that work. And as of today, there's tons of ways for you to become an ally to Indigenous people if you were to just Google it. I'm just lucky enough to highlight and repeat it here. Internalized racism and lateral violence is another form of violence Indigenous and marginalized folks experience. I had this awful thing happen on the C train where one of our Indigenous brothers who was houseless looked at me and gave me the, neck cross, and I was wearing Marilyn's mask and, visibly Indigenous woman. So I was really heartbroken that he did that. But the shitty part was, then the Calgary Police were like, we gave you a warning and we watched you do that to her. And I'm like, holy fuck, but I can't say anything or do anything because they have guns and they just recently killed a black guy and I didn't want them killing him. And like, he had like a scar on his head and I just felt so shitty. Anyway, that's internalized and lateral violence, because obviously he felt very comfortable telling me that he was going to kill me. Why? Because I'm an Indigenous woman. He's used to saying that. Why? Because he was taught all of this racism because it was imposed on us. And that's the shitty thing about internalized racism and lateral violence. And my heart, I've been actually praying for him because I know he's houseless and I know he has injuries and head trauma. And I know he doesn't have proper cultural supports because in Calgary, very clearly, all our elected officials and voters want us all dead. So yay, our team. Racialequitytools.org has lots of resources on internalized racism by Donna Bevins. Do's and don'ts for bystander intervention. I'm beginning to wonder why I share this, because even I don't feel empowered to do it when I'm around police and a society that doesn't care. Anyway, if you see or experience racism, reported to act2endracism.ca. If you text at 587-507-3838, it actually brings up that website. Indigenous have been talking about these issues, sharing our traumas in reports, commissions, and public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded. No more. Honor our words. Honor the treaties. I feel wild saying this because it's so clear that the only treaties that Canadians like are ones made by white people for white people, not Indigenous people. But if you did care, I wish you would honor the treaties you made with us. Anyway, listen to politicians and their policies and platforms. If they don't recognize marginalized people in their budget with Gender Equity Plus, Gay Straight Alliances, violence prevention program services, Indigenous education, uterus health choices, Gay Straight Alliances, human rights for migrants, immigrants, folks with disabilities. Know that your vote to that party directly negatively impacts marginalized people, which I know all you UCP voters are darn happy with right now, because that's not anything in Alberta's budget coming up. Yay, your team. I don't know how you sleep at night knowing you play with people's lives this way. Demand that they implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the multiple reports about child welfare reform, violence prevention, now 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit. Denying these reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people are experiencing extreme racism in the health, educational, and justice systems, with multiple reports that say the same things. By the way, if you've seen Dr. James Makokis tweeted out about Dr. Lana Potts, one of our Indigenous doctors who's a leader. Both of them are Indigenous doctors who are leaders, both of them advocating at the national scale for us to have health services that we have. Lana Potts was turned away from one of our Calgary restaurants because she's a visibly Native woman. So here's a doctor, lots of money, but we can't be a part of the economy because of racism. And I'm so dismayed. Everybody seems okay with it. Demand change from election platforms and politicians. You can clearly see this Zelensky fellow, although he was put down by the New York Times just recently, he stepped up, and now the entire world thinks he's like Captain America, but he's like Captain Ukraine. So like, you can see change from politicians. But if they don't understand colonialism, racism, privilege, and sexism, they literally have zero business running. Should be understood by all parties, local politicians, community organizations, sports clubs, etc. A great article I said out loud was Truth Before Truth, how non-Indigenous Canadians become allies. There's so many articles now, and this is just one of them that I think was fabulous. If you're experiencing emotional distress after anything we talked about today and want to talk, call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at 1-855-242-3310. It's toll free, open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can also go onto their website at hopeforwellness.ca, and they have a conversation option there. If more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, you can call 844-413-6649. For non-Indigenous, there are distress center lines in your area with a functioning 211, or you can call 833-456-4566. The 60 Scoop Indigenous Society of Alberta is ssisa.ca. The Trans Lifeline in Canada has some information. They have a number of 877-330-6366. The Trevor Project has tons of resources for LGBTQ2+, their youth, peer support. You can call them at 1-800-268-9688, or you can text at 647-694-4275. Kids Help Phone, 1-800-668-6868. Go to lifevoice.ca. There's tons of LGBTQ2+ crisis supports. Violence is my everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation has faced it. That's why I started a podcast to speak freely, without interruption, without tone police, leadership shaming, gaslighting questions. As many people don't want to hear Indigenous opinion, they sure want to tell us theirs. And these are people who know nothing about colonialism, the constant surveillance of Indigenous people, our protests, our vigils, and our rights, microaggressions, people dealing with internalized racism, people who are gatekeepers, survival status quo, folks who are deep in their trauma. These are the people I'm talking about every day. And this internal and external racism is an everyday reality for Indigenous people. And that's why I have this podcast. So I want to say thank you to my granny, my mom, what strength looks like through your example. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt. My stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family and roots and stepping up and teaching me to be a proud Calgarian. Just through her, I'm a second generation proud Calgarian, but I highly recommend if you are a native Calgarian, you don't say that unless you are a legitimate native. It's kind of racist. So the whole point of having my podcast name that was to point out everyday racism that average Canadians don't recognize. I want to say happy birthday to my husband, Darcy. Thank you for producing and editing this show. On top of being my husband, my childhood friend, he has witnessed decades of racism and sexism to our child. We are blessed to learn from daily. We are honored you chose us. Give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. And I hope my daughter and my family will be proud of us trying to discuss these present day issues. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com. You can also do e-transfers there. You can send in your comments or your questions. I also have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe at nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts. And I want to end with that side eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not Tradish. My beautiful cousin responded, or you'd be in my dish. Thanks for listening, and thoughts and prayers, obviously, to all of those impacted by what could end up being a nuclear holocaust. Let's hope I'm wrong. And push your leaders to be better leaders. Anyone is capable of being a Zelensky, especially on truth and reconciliation, sovereignty issues, so much. But, it's really up to the mass media, the masses in general. And right now we've seen that they're quite content and happy with half-ass measured, mandates being lifted and more. So I'll go from there and leave it from there. Have a great week.